Hi, my name is Ember Kelley, and welcome to this Fourth Universalist Society Digital Minimalism Journey Through Lent video. Today, I am really excited to get to sit down with Jose Briones, who is a YouTuber who talks about digital minimalism. He's actually the reason I picked out the flip phone that I did. So I hope you stick around and watch today's video. So I am really excited to have a special guest on for our digital minimalism journey video today. He is actually the YouTuber who, as I said in the introduction, who inspired me to pick out this specific phone. On his channel, he likes to review a lot of different technology and specifically about digital minimalism smartphones. And it was really his videos that inspired me to finally make that leap over to a flip phone. And so I'm really excited to get to sit down with Jose Briones today. And so, Jose, really great to have you here.
No, thank you, Amber. I really appreciate it. It's been a journey for me, and I'm excited to just talk about this topic that I think everyone should know a little bit more about.
Definitely, I think I'm hoping that at our congregation and in our wider community, I've maybe opened a little bit of some eyes with our videos talking about some of the successes, but also some of the challenges. So I'm kind of curious, what have been some of the challenges that you've faced as you've tried to live a more digitally minimalist life?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question. Everybody has different challenges. I think one of the main challenges for me is that since the pandemic, we have had to become more virtual in everything that we do. There is a kind of research that has been showing over the last couple of months about digital burnout. And essentially is that people are on the screen all the time. Like right now, we are not meeting in person, something that could have been done before the pandemic, but we are meeting, over Zoom. And yes, it has a lot of advantages, right? Zoom allows us to meet at miles of a distance and still have the ability to produce content, still to have the ability to record different things and, save money at the same time. I don't have to get a flight and go all the way to your location. You don't have to go and get a flight and come all the way down. But one of the biggest challenges has been adapting to a digital world while still remaining minimalist in our digital usage. And for that is I receive more emails nowadays. I receive more digital meetings nowadays. I receive more WhatsApp messages for my work. So a way for me to cope with that has been I have started to separate the way in which I interact. So for example, I have my personal phone. Anyone that watches the channel will know I have the Light Phone 2. That's my primary device. And then I have a secondary device, which is now another feature phone that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago called the Nokia 6300 4G. Before that, I used to have a smartphone for my work device. But essentially, I combined my devices for personal and for work. That way I can leave them behind and I don't have to be engaged all the time. So that has been definitely a difficulty, not engaging in the digital world. Another one is from the professional standpoint. As a professional, I have to remain connected with sources of information. And also, I have to remain connected with other people and make networking, right? It's important, especially as a young professional, to make connections that can take you to the next level or to a different job at some point in time. So it's a temptation for me to open up those channels of communication once again. Last year in 2020, I decided to shut down my Facebook and my Instagram. And I've been tempted from time to time to reopen those channels because, it's good networking. But I have remained away from it and I'm finding other meaningful ways of connecting. And I think that this is where digital minimalism comes. It's not necessarily that you have to quit everything that you know and love, it's that you have to find a balance that works for you.
Right, definitely. And I think what you were talking about there with the pandemic resonates a lot with me. And I think that was what gave me the final push. I had started kind of embracing it a little bit before the pandemic. Back in 2018, I had went down to like an hour on my phone every day. Then the pandemic happened, and suddenly it was like, boom, I'm spending 10 hours a day on my phone, especially because I was living abroad at the time. And so I felt like I really needed to be digitally connected with what was going on in the world. And so then it just felt like this pull that I'm like, no, this isn't like healthy for me. This isn't good. I can't find this good balance. And I think that the pandemic's definitely really strengthened a lot of people's feelings on that. And even for me, as I practice this, even with switching to a flip phone, it feels weird calling myself a digital minimalist when I spend like 4 to 8 hours a day doing work on an iPad that I'm editing videos. I'm like, am I really a digital minimalist?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge, and definitely depends on the work that you do. Over this year, I've started to do a little bit less videos just because, well, there's not a lot of new feature phones coming out, or dumb phones, as most people call them. That's one thing that has kind of like limited, but at the same time, I put a restriction on myself, and I've decided to release a little bit differently now. I'm going to edit when I can. I'm going to release when I can. And, I mean, my main profession is not being a YouTuber. It's kind of like a secondary passion for me. So it works out in that sense. But I can imagine if I were just doing YouTube, it will be very difficult for me to remain, quote unquote, completely digital minimalist and not have this, attachment to the digital sphere, because you had to stay connected, you had to publish, you have to get content out there. And a lot of the information technology, or just, in the regular knowledge workers, as Cal Newport puts it in many of his books, if you work with knowledge, if you're trying to convey communications and stuff like that, you have to remain connected one way or another. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to take breaks. Something that I've been embracing over the last couple of weeks, and I'm still testing, and I'll be doing a video on it, it's proposing an idea of offline days. So throughout your month, you have 30 days, usually 31 or 30 or 28, depending on the month, 29 if it's a special year, right? Whenever you plan your week, that you have at least one day to take off completely, or hours at the very least, where you can say, for the next 4 hours, I'm going to be completely offline. Not going to check my phone, only do offline activities, focus on my passions. Let it be, something manual, let it be working out, let it be doing something that doesn't require the internet. Spending time with family, building a puzzle, whatever it is, right? There's plenty of activities that we can get to, but you have to be really intentional about that. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be trying a method that I've been playing with, and it's essentially one day online, and then one day off. And then eventually, once I'm able to create some consistency with that, I'm going to set up my email such a way that it replies to people and tells them like, hey, I'm going to be off from this time to this time, or I'm going to be off in a certain day. So if you really need to connect with me, if you really need to contact me, because there are emergencies, there are things that cannot need to get done, then text me or call me, or something like that, because I'm still going to have access to that, but now I'm not going to have access to my email. So it's breaks, especially as human beings. I mean, I talked about digital burnout. You can see a lot of articles coming out, and also some research coming from, journals, because of analyzing the pandemic and the tolls in humanity throughout this past year. But taking a break is an utmost necessity for sure.
Right. I mean, I would dare say it's a little bit of a spiritual practice. And you and I discovered that we did have something in common in some of our preparation questions. And it turns out that not only do you have this background in digital minimalism, which is what connected us to this video today, but that you also have a background in studying theology as well.
That's correct. Yeah, I went to Southern Adventist University. I'm an Adventist myself. Right. And then I went to get my MDiv as well. So I got an MDiv. So I'm part of that tradition, that denominational tradition. So when I started watching videos from you guys, like, just kind of checking out the content, it's really good to connect it with spirituality. Because, if you're a spiritual person, and it doesn't mean that digital minimalism cannot be experienced from, a different variety of experiences. You don't have to be religious to experience it, right? And you don't have to not be religious in order to experience it as well. But there is a component of spirituality that, allows you to reconnect with a higher being, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it God, Allah, if you are for whatever religion, allows you to reconnect with the world even, if you believe in naturalism, just from that naturalist perspective, it just allows us to be human once again, and not be so focused on these, the attention economy, keeping your attention and doing all of these things.
Right. That's slowing down. I mean, you were talking about email, and everybody expects. And for a while, especially, I started this job last July, and I really expected myself to be like, okay, I got to reply to emails within like a few hours because I got to make like a really good first impression. And like that's not necessary. Like it's important for us as human beings to take time to slow down and understand that if we're always running in that like constantly on, that's leaving us in like this alert mindset that's not letting our minds have any rest. Like that's not what human beings were meant to do, to always be, okay, I need to be ready for like the next thing that's going to need my immediate attention. That isn't like the default state for human beings. It's just what smartphones and technology has kind of fostered into expectations now.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that something that comes to my mind is how the smartphone is becoming that tool that is something that we're not willing to go outside of our homes without, because we may need it for transportation, or we may need it for calling an Uber, we may need it to get a payment, Venmo, Cash App, things of that nature here in the United States, and other payment systems outside of the United States as well. There's a lot of areas where, sadly, you have the smartphone and it's sometimes necessary. I mean, even if you go to a restaurant, for those states that are open, you go there, you're not going to get a menu anymore. You're going to go with the QR code. And yes, those things can be good improvements, but it also requires that, there is a participation in the economy from a expensive perspective. Smartphones are not cheap, at least the ones that work decently well. So you may be trapped into something that you have to get the latest and greatest device in order to participate in the economy. Of course, we're not there yet, but I can definitely see it as going or trending towards that area, which can be a little bit problematic for some, because, with smartphones comes a lot of responsibility. Not only you have access to all of these apps and powerful tools, but you also have, companies who may not have the best intentions for you. I mean, the intention for the company is for you to see advertisements, for monetizing, your perspectives, the way that you think, or the websites that you visit, right? And we've been battling this kind of like user versus consumer, like not consumer, but like company, right? User versus company. It's just like, it's a very fine balance that, I mean, I personally like that I have two feature phones because they track me less. Not to say that, I mean, one of them, the Nokia device still tracks me because it has some Google, applications and stuff like that, or other applications, but it tracks me way less than a smartphone would, it's not mining data at my expense all the time.
Right. Well, and so you've switched to these feature phones, dumb phones, whatever folks want to call them, flip phones. Some of them just the nice solid bricks. That's definitely a way that I know on my end has really helped me with the screens. It's weird how five weeks in for myself, as of the time that we're recording this, that like I feel like my brain has like shifted in terms of what I'm expecting from my phone. That I've just gotten used to it after 5 weeks now, and I actually don't think that I'll go back. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like your experience switching to feature phones, and like maybe some of our listeners, I know all about the light phone, but maybe if you want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think of feature phones, you may think nostalgically, right, to your old Nokia device, or even to a BlackBerry device back in the 2000s, right? Like that's where you got your first cell phone if you're a millennial. If you're Generation X, you may even remember the first cellular devices with big antennas, right? I grew up outside of the States. So, I grew up in Nicaragua, and I grew up at a time where we were kind of like 10 years behind the United States when it comes to technology. Therefore, the affordable technology when I was back there in my country back then, we were able to get those big antenna ones that you had to like, flip out and everything. I still remember that was one of my first devices. So the devices for feature phones today are completely different. And that's something that a lot of people do not understand. We used to get these very rugged, unlimited battery devices, right? That had just, the basics, but that they did it very well. Today in the feature phone landscape, there is a lot of issues, because not only there is fragmentation on the operating systems, there's multiple operating systems being used. Some feature phones use Android, some feature phones use their own system, some feature phones use KaiOS, some feature phones are developing operating systems from the ground up. So there is that inconsistency, and not all the features are supported. So if you were to switch from a smartphone, like I did, into a feature phone, at least the first one that I did, it was not a light phone, but it was an old feature phone that I had, just, kind of like one of those sliders that had the keyboard. I found myself in a big pickle. Number one, yes, my experience of browser and email kind of went away. So you start kind of have a little bit of a withdrawal, to a certain degree. But after that, you kind of get used to it. The problem is that some feature phones didn't have group messages, right? So there was no group message, there was no hotspot or Bluetooth compatibility, right? So I was like, this is getting on the way of how I live my life. The light phone for a very long time did not have music or podcasts. I'm a very big podcast listener. So I always had to kind of go back to a smartphone, right? Like, so I bought the light phone, which is my preferred. It's the one that I have made the most videos about. And it's the one that I recommend the most, because even though it's a little bit expensive and on the expensive side for a feature phone, right? It is the one that gets the most support. It's not perfect, but it's the one that the company is going to respond for. Meanwhile, if you get a little bit of the, more inexpensive feature phones, you may have more troubles, more bugs, and the company may not respond, just because that's not their priority. Their priority is just to sell you the device, and whatever happens after that, you're fine with. So the device that I've settled on is the Light Phone 2. So I have actually two versions here in my room. I have the dark version, so if people can see it. And I also have the white version. So right there for people to see it. And this device is great. I personally have come to enjoy it a lot because it has all of the basic features. You get calls, you get texts, you have music, you have podcasts, you have an alarm, you have a calculator. And now in April, I don't know when this is going to be released, but if you're watching in April or very early May, they're going to release directions. So, at first there was those friction points, right? I don't have email, I don't have browser. Okay, that's fine. I don't have podcast. Oh man, that's kind of a rough thing. I don't have music. How am I going to go to the gym, right? I don't have GPS. And I was like, oh man, this is kind of like, it's kind of like a downside. There's too many downsides to it. But over time, the device has evolved. So I personally use it because it has evolved and continues to evolve. So they continue to add new features, and they will continue to add new features. So when you're switching, if you're going to switch, you really need to be mindful about the things that you absolutely need. So for example, if podcasts is very important to you, find a feature phone. I have plenty of reviews, right? Like, and you can send me a message if you have a specific request or anything, or a specific question about feature phones. Find one that has a podcast app. If you really value GPS, find one that has a reliable GPS. Or the other kind of workaround is that you find companion devices. I like to call it that. You find your phone for calls and text messages, and then you offset the tools, like let's say Uber or GPS, to an iPod or to a iPhone or your smartphone, but it doesn't have your SIM card anymore. So in order to use it, you have to go through the process of turning on your hotspot, connecting it to Wi-Fi, and then you can use it. And I find that there are people who are able to make it work like that. And I'm excited to see how people decide to use their devices and adopt the principles of digital minimalism as well.
Definitely. Well, I mean, I think that that was originally part of my thought with the shock was that, oh well, I'll have the flip or the smartphone as kind of a side device, but then it ended up being compatible with the things that I needed, which was the transportation app here in New Jersey because I commute over to New York City, a little bit cheaper here on the Jersey side, and then it has WhatsApp, and then that's really been it. Like it does what I need, and then I'm mostly at home right now, and I have the iPad, but then I did as far as companion devices, I got a couple maps. I got myself a compass, and then I also did get like I found like a $20 just like little small, basically iPod Nano, but made by some other company now, and it's been great for me. I like to alternate that out, or I have if I'm at home, I do have the iPad for like listening to podcasts, listening to audio. But I've also been really like trying to like set timers and like expectations of like this is like the amount of work time I'm going to allow for myself today. This is the amount of time that I'm going to like check my emails. Like specifically, I have it set so that when I click the email on the iPad, it pops up and it has the little timer app also pop up, and I have to click like, okay, well, I'm using part of my 30 minutes to check the email, and so I'm giving myself four different like 30-minute ranges throughout the day. That's like my time I can check email. That way I'm not spending I was spending so many mornings just like checking email first thing. And so I'm like, nope, you got to wait till at least 8 a.m. before you check it the first time. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. There's so many workarounds. There's so many different ways to do this. I think a lot of people, especially, since maybe some of the bigger names in the minimalism world have these very like strict views about you need to not own any belongings and you need to not even have a phone at all, just get a landline. But really good minimalism is, as we've been talking about, it's about this balance, and that's going to look different for everybody.
Absolutely. You can have a smartphone and be a digital minimalist. I mean, it doesn't require you to switch to a feature phone. That's kind of a misconception, you know. Yes, I mean, there are idealists, just have a phone, a landline, you don't have any kind of connection in this kind of way. But I found myself, or the way that I look at it is, I look at it from an economic perspective. If you have a job, that is not your own job, like, it's not your own trade, as in like, it's not your own business, you're going to have very difficult time not following whatever that job requires. So if your job requires email, you have to have email. It's not like, oh, I don't want to have email all of a sudden and, I'll be fine with it. No, this is your job. It's something that you are required to do. Sometimes people that may have a little bit of more of an idealist, kind of like just own this or do this, they may have jobs that they're not required to do these things. So you have to look at it from like, you have to participate in the economy. You have to work. What are the requirements for me to actually get this job or to do this job efficiently? Can I do it just from my computer, or do I need to do it from my smartphone as well? There are jobs that require smartphones. There are other jobs that only require a computer from you. So you have to look at it from that perspective. I've always found that whenever you're transitioning jobs, though, that's the best time to make sweeping changes for your lifestyle, and not only for digital minimalism, but like, just the way that you are hoping to eat, lifestyle, diet, workouts, because you're entering into a new space and you have the agency to set it up again. Also, there is other people that will say, smartphones are not a problem. It's not an issue. I can use it. I don't have an issue. I have self-control. And that is true. There is a lot of people that have self-control, and I applaud those people. I think, more props to you. Excellent. But sometimes not everyone's the same, not sometimes, always, right? We are created differently. We have different experiences. We have, just different ways and upbringings. And that, meshes into the fabric of life. So you have to be realistic into who are you? Are you a very compulsive person that likes to use the latest and greatest, and you're spending $1,000 every year into the latest and greatest Apple device? Well, if that's you, you have to come to terms with that. And is that the kind of life that you want to lead in the future? If that's the kind of life that you want to lead in the future, well, you're going to be contributing to Apple becoming one of the most powerful companies in the world. But if that's not who you want to be, if you want to be someone that, you know, uses a device for a very long period of time, you also will, you know, iPhones are a great example of that. You know, you can use an iPhone for about 3-4 years. That way you're not purchasing again and again and again. But you need to learn how to use it as well. You need to learn the pros and the cons of these devices. And I think the main cons that I see, just from a personal perspective, and maybe a little bit of a philosophical perspective as well, you know, when I think of like the great philosophers in life, uh, you know, I guess I am partial to some of the German philosophers of the 20th century. So I think of Nietzsche, I think of Wittgenstein, you know, I think of their theories of language. I think of their theories of even nihilism, you know, which is not a very popular theory. But when you know, when you're old, when you go towards the end of your life, you're going to look back and you're going to say, how did I spend my life? Are you going to be satisfied with spending your life, you know, doing the activities that you do with the smartphone that you do? And if so, good for you. But if you want to make a change, then start learning, why is it that your smartphone traps you? Why is it that you feel so much dependent upon these things? It used to be not so long ago, 10, 15 years ago, that in order to find an answer, we had to either go look it up in the library, go read a book, or ask someone. You know, if you wanted to find directions, sure, you may have had what was it called, a Palm Pilot, I believe, right? You know, the good old
Yes.
GPSs of old. You may have had that, and that's good. That's great. But if you didn't have that, you need to ask another human being, and that requires that that other human being has a hippocampus big enough that he has been able to remember all of the streets in the city of New York, for example. So it required for us to use our brain in a way that we're not using it anymore. And I think that's a detriment to our human abilities. We are dependent upon these devices so much that we're not memorizing as much. The one litmus test I always ask people is, how many phone numbers do you know anymore? How many phone numbers do you memorize? I remember, you know, in 2005, I needed to know my mom, my dad's, my aunts, you know, everybody in my family. I needed to know their phone numbers by memory. And some people will say, that's not a problem. I don't have to memorize those things. But that comes at a detriment. And we have to analyze those detriments and those negative portions of owning a smartphone. Sorry for the long answer.
Oh, I think that's a phenomenal answer actually, and it had me reflecting on just a few different recent experiences, and the memorizing thing definitely resonated. It had me thinking about how 2005, 2006 or so, end of high school for me, and uh, I probably still in my mind remember half of the phone numbers that I memorized back then, but I couldn't tell you many of the numbers of places that I call all the time now, or work, or my boss, or for a while it was hard to even remember my own number, especially like when I was living abroad. But so I had a doctor's appointment that was in Brooklyn, and living in New Jersey, that's a little bit of a haul. And I decided when I was on this trip, I said, you know what? I'm gonna take like the train over there, and I'm gonna get to the World Trade Center. But then, like, I have enough time. Why don't I just walk the Brooklyn Bridge? But I've never been to the Brooklyn Bridge before, so I looked up the directions beforehand. I jotted down some notes to myself, looked at the maps, and it was such a good like mental exercise to be doing that
Mhm.
memorizing. To be like, yeah, I've really noticed, even in just 5 weeks, like a real change in habits in terms of my brain kind of like trying to remember more things, being a little bit more cognizant of what's going on around me. And then also, gosh, I went from uh, really having trouble finding time when I wanted to read to like I finished like 3 books in like the last 2 weeks. I think it really has the ability to change our habits and our hobbies and our interests if we step away a little bit. I'm kind of curious if there's like any maybe new activities, new hobbies, new things that you've maybe gotten more involved in as you've gotten less in
Yeah,
the digital world.
absolutely. You know, from a personal perspective, definitely, you know, I have more time for myself. The less screen time that I have had, the more time I have in order to, you know, go on a walk or work out or read books. You know, those are kind of like some of the things. But from a professional perspective, I think that that's where I have acquired a little bit more of a kind of an advantage. You know, I'm able to reflect longer upon my work and the things that I've been doing. and where I want to go with that. So those times of boredom, I think, or just empty space, right? Empty time where I would just be scrolling, looking at Facebook, Instagram, looking at this website or whatever it is, looking at information, because that's another thing that, the digital platforms allow you to get, just information, thoughts from different people. It has allowed me time for reflection. I do think that my job allows me for that time of reflection in order to produce quality content. I'm not talking about YouTube, but just talking about from religious, I work with religious institutions. So it's just like, it allows me to reflect more on the information that I'm reading. It allows me to look upon like, okay, this is where I see my community in need. And this is the programs that we can develop as a community, as a community of believers, in order to help our community at large. So it allows me to think deeply and process better, so those are things that were not so much present with an overload of information. I think that, as I've been experiencing this over the past year, I've come to realize that the more time I have for myself, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because it allows me to know, hey, is what I'm doing what I actually want to do for the rest of my life? Where do I want to go forwards with this? What projects do I want to take into? And it allows me to think from a more general overview, rather than just like, okay, I need to deal with this, I need to deal with that. I have this piece of information, I have that piece of information, so on and so forth. So there are abilities, I believe, that we are either cultivating them through this kind of boredom time or free time. And there are abilities that we may be losing as a result as well. Abilities that, we used to have 10 to 15 years ago, maybe 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, I still remember, with computational, just mathematics, in my math class, I was not allowed a calculator in some of my tests. And sometimes when I go to schools or like, I have some trainings or whatever it is, I see that it's become like almost a necessity, right? Like, like, oh, I need to have my calculator. If not, I'm not going to be able to pass. I'm not going to be able to compute these basic operations. And, I just invite you to do a field test for yourself, just test it with your friends, with your family, and see where they go. What do they ask first? Do they think about trying to mine that from the back of their heads? We all learn about world history at some point in time. We all learn about mathematics, but do they try to mine that from the back of their heads, long-term memory, try to retrieve that information? Or do we just go with the easy, like, hey, whatever smart speaker you have, I'm not trying to trigger it right here. Hey, smart speaker, give me the answer to this, right? So we offset all of the hard work that has a deep impact into our lives to a machine, and it's just funny because human beings have always been, since the rise of technology and the industries, we've always been afraid that the machine will take over. Well, the reality is that the machine has taken over in certain areas. And the more it takes over, the more convenient our life becomes. But at what cost, I would say, is the actual, answer that we have to formulate. Is it at the cost of our humanity? And what is that cost? And am I willing to bear that cost at the same time?
I can't think of a better place to end this video. I think that is a great final challenging thought for our listeners. So Jose, thank you so much for coming on the video today.
No problem. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And if people need to contact me, you can put my email, in there. So in the description, or, whatever it is. And you can check my channel. I also have my email there. You can contact me if you have any questions, or if you just want to talk, just have conversations about this. I'm open to have them.